Welcome to another episode of Control Alt Love, where all love is beautiful, and we answer your alternative relationship questions. So we're
I think you might cut out again. You might have to switch to just the laptop mic. Nothing still. I can't hear you. Do you want me to do it? I'll just do it. Okay. Take your time.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly. It was weird.
Wonderful.
It was working, and then it cut out. It was weird. But you're good now.
Awesome. Okay, guys, we're officially starting the show now. Everything else doesn't matter. Today has been that kind of day. Hello and welcome to Control Alt Love, where all love is beautiful and we answer all your alternative relationship questions. We are excited today to be talking about the most important part of a relationship, even a monogamous one. It's important to know what the expectations are for your relationship. So we talked about nonviolent communication in a previous episode, and I encouraged you to look at that episode in order to encourage good communication between you and your partner during these negotiations. Nonviolent communication allows people to really reach deep and give a language without blame in order to communicate both of your feelings and needs so that they will best be heard by your partner and understood by you. So make sure that you check out that episode with Katie Testa in order to learn more about nonviolent communication. We are looking forward to offering courses in nonviolent communication on the upcoming site and that I'm launching for alternative relationships. And this site will have tools to better your relationship and find new ones. We're so excited and hoping for a launch in February. So today, we have a brand new guest host. Please help me in welcoming Tony Rosano. He has been poly for many years. He also has experience in the swinger and kink community, so he'll be able to really help with those kinds of relationships. So Tony, please say hi to my audience. They're very excited to meet you.
You want me to just do a quick brief overview of myself?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about
So I wanted to actually, I didn't change the wording in our notes, but I actually wanted to point this out, is that I haven't been poly for many years. I've been poly my whole life. I've only recognized being poly. So I like to point out the wording actually matters in that situation.
It does.
Yeah. But I've been actively exercising polyamorous relationships for probably close to 2 decades, probably since after high school, probably around college age. Plural non-monogamy. There's various other terms for it. But I've been active in both the kink community, polyamorous communities, swinging communities, and I don't necessarily gravitate towards one or the other. They all have their different facets. I'm kind of my own unique creature when it comes to a lot of this.
And that's what makes you beautiful. I love unique individuals. And that's why I asked Tony to come on. He has so much experience. So today, Tony and I will be going over how to negotiate a romantic relationship. We will be doing the sexual relationship episode in a different episode because it really deserves its own episode. But even monogamous people can benefit from a well-negotiated relationship. Many monogamous people don't know what cheating is for their partner. So we just say there's no cheating when you're all playing by the same rules. Often you'll ask a monogamous person, what is defined cheating? Can you hug people? Can you kiss people? And they don't really know. The lines are all blurred because a lot of monogamous people assume that everybody has the same mindset about cheating, which is utterly ridiculous. And one of the reasons that I often say that polyamory isn't nearly as odd as people seem to think it is. It's just we have the tendency to negotiate what cheating is. And our definition of cheating tends to be a lot further down the spectrum of things that you're allowed to do. That's really the only difference. That and there's other people involved. Which gets a little fun and confusing at times. But you know, what are the rules is probably the big question that you're asking, and the answer really is it's different for everyone. So I'll turn it over to Tony now to give his expert opinion on this situation, because I asked him specifically to come on and take lead on this episode because he has so much experience, and I'll be adding little tidbits here and there, but I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. So I've experienced forever aloneness. I've experienced monogamy, plural monogamy, and various other forms of consensual monogamy. And each time it's something you learn with time and age, is how do you handle the specific relationships, but also in the individual people as well. But there are some consistent factors, and it doesn't matter if it's a plural or a monogamous relationship. The one rule that I think is most important is honesty. Sometimes there's other rules as well. But I think it's the most important. Let me just move my notes around here. I know there exist relationships where partners may pay with others without telling their partners, in a form of non-monogamy. Some may agree to this beforehand, some not. And that's where you get into okay, we're going to see other people, but I don't want to know about it. That's sort of consensual because you've negotiated those terms. But if you go ahead and do that without pre-negotiating, that's where you start getting into the cheating territory from my perspective, if you want to get to just the facts. But even in those situations, I find that the ones where you're pre-negotiating, those are the more stronger relationships. That at least what I observe with friends. I'm not really into cuckolding or even cheating, or even swinging to a limited. I'm into swinging a little bit, but not really. It's not really my vice. But it's definitely the communication skills is where it's going to come down to. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I can go on communication.
Yeah, so communication and honesty, really. Honesty and communication go really, really hand in hand. But as far as honesty, I think it's really important to consider being honest with yourself. And one of the reasons that I advocate and promote nonviolent communication is because a lot of people have a very difficult time just even being honest with themselves and what they want and what they need. And so before negotiating a poly relationship, the biggest first aspect is to search deep and be honest with yourself. What are you truly comfortable with? What do you want for yourself? What do you want in a relationship? There's so many questions. And I think that, it's really important to kind of cover some of the questions that people might have when they're doing this search before negotiation. So I would say, a few for me that pop up for me, and then I would love to hear what would come up in your mind, is first of all, what am I comfortable doing with other people while I have a partner? What's my comfort zone? Second, what would I like out of my relationships? Would I like a hierarchy system? That's a big one.
Yeah, and I've seen different configurations of different types of hierarchies.
Right. What do I want in a partner in general? And I mean, this comes from any relationship. You're going to always ask that, but the regular relationship questions, of course. But then there's, I would also say that another big question is, what am I comfortable with my partner doing? And am I comfortable expressing to my partner that my comfort zone with other people and their comfort zone might be totally different things. And my comfort zone with what they do and my comfort zone with what I do might be completely different things too.
Right.
You know, I find that my partners are comfortable with me just doing what I please. I tell them anyway, but they just start like, just, you know, let me know at some point that you are seeing
Yeah,
people.
I feel weird not telling them. It's
Yeah,
just
and
me.
exactly. And I'm like, I want to tell you right away, and I want you to tell me right away. I would feel very betrayed if you didn't tell me before you did something, especially because one of them is a monogamous relationship. So I would really want to know if he was suddenly going to be not
Well,
monogamous.
even before you even get into the poly area of things, you also have to talk about. I mean, you have to approach the communication between you and your just original partner. Sometimes there's things that you're not comfortable doing with each other, or things that you do prefer. There's like 1,000 different kink checklists online, and everybody's going to fill that out a little different. Like somebody's into handcuffs, somebody's not into handcuffs. You know, spanking, non-spanking, everybody's a little different. And if you fill out those little charts, you know, they usually it's like a scale of 1 to 5. Everybody fills it out differently. And that's even on an individual level, not even necessarily a poly level. Um, and I actually recommend probably even starting that off with yourself, learning about yourself before you even start even looking at what your partner's into, and then other partners even past that. But that's definitely something I think is worthwhile, even just doing alone. And it's good. It's easier to start communicating with yourself than it is starting to, you know, before you communicate to your partner. Because sometimes you're like, oh, I want to try this, and you're a little nervous approaching your partner. I can totally understand that anxiety. But if you're not even having that conversation with yourself, it's going to be even harder having the conversation with your partner. Um, but yeah, these are things that you want to think about before you even approach your partner. Also, maybe there's not even another person you want to involve in your relationship, but you want to down the line. It's always best to start thinking about that ahead of time, especially if you know you're poly and you may not necessarily be in any relationship and you start dating. It's good to inform that person right from the get-go. It makes great conversation on the very first date, actually. I have never had it impede my dating ability. In fact, anything, it's usually it's an interesting facet that they're like, oh, this guy's poly. That's kind of interesting. I want to learn more. And maybe they may not be into poly, but they're going to start asking questions, and you never know where that conversation may lead. And like I said, I've never had it be a roadblock in dating someone new. Um, Now, if you're talking about when you're already with somebody, how do you talk to them, saying, "Hey, I would like to open this up to somebody else"? Again, it's always easier if you're approaching this from a standpoint where there isn't a third person already in mind. Because if there's a third person already in mind, it's possible to open up those types of negotiations, but it's a little bit bigger hurdle, and that's just experience. It's human nature. Humans are jealous by nature, and even in poly relationships, yes, there's even still jealousy. And I know other people like to use other words, or you say that as a symptom to other things, but um, it's you remove the jealousy of another person component when the other person doesn't even exist. So it's always good to have these conversations long in advance to know where you stand. And when those situations present themselves, maybe the feelings may be different at that moment in time, but at least you have a baseline of which you've already started.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. I think that it's about having that baseline and about you know, and it just all goes back to that honest communication. I mean, if you two really care for each other and love each other, then any questions or concerns that you have, if voiced in a mature way, are going to be perfectly acceptable and understandable.
Mhm.
They're probably asking the same questions in their head. You know, oftentimes we're so nervous to say things to people and to put ourselves out there when in all reality, most people have the exact same questions going on in their head. And we end up, it's that relief that, you know, the other person's worried about this too. And as long as that comes from a place of love and respect, I think that any sort of conversation that you have is going to be positive because it's coming from that place of love. It's not a, you know, this is what I'm going to do. And, you know, you just need to accept that because that's who I am. And I hear too many of these negotiation conversations go that way. And they just go the route of, you know, I'm poly and that's how it is. And this is what I do. And if you can't accept that, then you either don't love me or you shouldn't be with me. And it's like, wow, I mean, who would want to be with that person in the first place? They're so set in stone, there's no room for growth. And so it's really important that when we consider these negotiations, I really do, and I know that I hit on this every single episode now, but really the nonviolent communication really helps you be able to express your feelings and needs in a way that don't come off as attacking or blaming. And that's really important.
What,
But yeah.
there's something about the negotiations I also want to think about is human sexuality is dynamic. So are relationships. There's so many facets about human nature that's dynamic depending on the moment in time. How you feel about something now, you may feel totally different 6 months from now, which is another fascinating thing. If you fill out those checklists, you visit them 6 months later and you'll say, I was into that, or oh, I'm totally into that now. I can't believe I wasn't into that. Or, you know, we change over time. It's so true, isn't it? It's like, I tried that. It was horrible. I would never do that again. I'm never coming close to fire again like that.
Or you like see something and you're just like, I would never do that. That sounds so gross. And then you like later you're just like, that looks kind of interesting. I don't know why I thought that looked gross before.
Yes, exactly. But it's not just even kinky things, but small things like what you like. I mean, you know, this week you may like chocolate ice cream, and maybe a couple months from now you like coconut ice cream or something like that. I mean, our tastes change, and that's why I think it's important to think of the relationship as one giant negotiation. It's continuous. I don't think it's the thing that you just do at the very beginning. While I do think that the major things you just should approach beforehand or at the beginning of the relationship, so they aren't like big things later on. Um, uh, but you're continuously negotiating, and it's fascinating. If you're, I started dating a woman recently, which you're aware of, and we got all the major stuff out of the way, like the very first conversation pretty much. And it was nice because she knew I was poly before we started dating because it came up in conversation beforehand. So she knew I was poly, but the expectations of what our relationship hadn't been negotiated yet. So basically getting the poly issue out of the way was one thing, and then the specifics to us was something we had to deal with, and we negotiated and talked about. But I actually discovered something recently, and it actually is an interesting way to open up negotiations because you're always negotiating, and that's movies. A lot of us are, you know, the cinematography is great, and there's some good movies out there. I mean, if you want to explore BDSM, probably put on put on the movie The Secretary. That's probably a really good. It's dramatic and it's a little outside. You know, it's a movie. It's for entertainment, but it may open up conversation. But if you want to talk in terms of poly, we actually just watched Summer Lovers. It's one of my favorite movies. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't. What's it about?
Okay, I highly recommend. It's 1982, so it's an older film, but it actually very accurately depicts the nuances of a poly relationship. It's a little bit more on the sexy end because it's a movie, so there's going to be a lot of boobs and a lot of sex. You also have to keep in mind 1982, what's acceptable in a movie is also somewhat limited, but it's actually a great depiction of before the poly relationship starts, and then also what happens during, and then the consequences of that relationship. It's a very good movie. and it's a nice romance. And I don't want to spoil the film, so I do highly recommend. But there were a few scenes which are worth pointing out, and it was interesting. So like. They're in Greece. They're on vacation, visiting Greece. The two Americans, and they aren't married, but they've been together for like 10 years. It was a long established relationship, and they're totally into each other. They're still going at it every night, just about. And then but then they're exploring the island. She's exploring the shops, and he's exploring the beach and the surfers and all that stuff like that. And then he sees this beautiful girl on the beach, absolutely beautiful woman. And then they make the eye contact, and then there's some flirtation. And my partner says to me, she says, "Is that considered cheating right there, just the flirtation?" And to some people, it may be obvious whether that is or isn't, but it's still worth talking with your partner. Is flirtation even talking about? Is flirtation okay within the relationship? Some people like flirting with people, even if it doesn't even go anywhere. It's sort of just the excitement of the thrill, knowing that it possibly could. And it's like almost in your mind, you can create these little stories, like, and you live out like 20 years in your head in a span of like 30 seconds. Okay, yeah, I could totally have a relationship with this person. It's not going to happen because it wouldn't work, but it's fantasy. And we're all entitled to fantasy. Um, but sometimes there are relationships where even flirtation is not okay. But again, it's going to be specific on the relationship. And then later in the movie, um, he kisses her, and then but he didn't tell the girl, his original girlfriend, that he kissed her. And I have to side on the fact that that was in fact cheating, and that was outside the bounds of the relationship because it wasn't negotiated at all. However, he immediately, right after that, he immediately tells her. And you know, again, you also have to think this is 1982. If this was 1982 me, I might have thought something slightly different. We take for granted technology we have now that we didn't have back then. Cell phones. um, when I'm at a party, if I'm flirting with a girl, even if it's not going anywhere, I immediately text my significant other or others saying, "Hey, there's this cute girl here. She's rather cute." Or I'm out with Lauren Rempler. We're having chocolate at Parkfest. I was totally doing that too. And I
He was. We had chocolate together at Porkfest.
yes,
We had tea too. He
we had
makes the most
tea. Yes.
But
So
that's
we
really good that you are so open to communicating with your partners. And I think honesty and communication are really the cornerstones of a negotiating a good relationship. But I kind of want to get into a little bit of, since we're about midway, so I want to talk about some of the different dynamics, because I know that people have questions about don't ask, don't tell relationships, how to negotiate those, mono-poly relationships, triads, and I'll be able to help you along the way with those. But I thought we'd go ahead and start with the don't ask, don't tell, because those are honestly the most easily negotiated relationships.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
not complicated.
yeah. The don't ask, don't tell is probably the least complicated, as far as how you'd handle those. Um, but from a relation standpoint, I'm in the camp where I think that that's very difficult to maintain.
Oh, I
On,
agree. And
on an
I said on the
emotional level, it's an emotional thing. It's like it's the physics of communication is easy, but the emotional thing is complex. Um, and for some people that works, and I see that in the swinger community. I'm actually still close friends with many people in the swinger community, who I don't have sex with or anything like that. Maybe years ago perhaps I did, um, but there are some couples out there, especially in that community, where it's like a total thrill every time, and they aren't necessarily establishing close relationships with others. And then there are a few relationships where I see do branch off into solid relationships separately, and where their negotiations become tougher is not actually being with the other person, but bringing the relationship back together. So like you're constantly dating this person on Tuesdays and you're dating this person on Wednesdays. Eventually, you're going to want those two people to meet or not. But you're gonna, if it's gonna be a long-term thing that spans years, then you probably are gonna have to talk to your partner and say, okay, Wednesdays is this person, Tuesdays is this person, or whatever. Whereas some people who are just doing one night stands may not necessarily say the person's name or when.
Yeah, and I mean, there's got to be some communication in that relationship about, where they are. Because I know I'm somebody that wants to know where my partner is. I mean, I know when he goes to work,
And that's
because we
not
live,
even, and that's not
we,
even
we
a possessive thing either. It's just common courtesy sometimes, a peace of mind.
right. And so I guess maybe like a word for like, you don't want to know where I am in a don't ask, don't tell relationship. But, I would there was one night that I couldn't get a hold of him, and I was panicking, and it was awful. And that's only happened one time, and it scared the life out of me. I cannot imagine having a don't ask, don't tell relationship where I'm constantly wondering if they're going to come home or not.
Yeah.
So,
I've been in that situation, and I don't like it.
I've often said that I don't think that that's a healthy relationship. I understand it works for some people, and I'm not trying to be judgy, but I would never do it. But let's move on, if it's okay with you, to a monopoly relationship, which is a little bit more difficult. In fact, quite a bit. Actually, why don't we start with a simple poly relationship? Because monopoly is actually a little bit more complicated than just a poly relationship, I would say.
Well, well, poly can be all kinds of configurations. It could be one.
Right.
Yeah, it's you got MFMs, FMMs, and
Well,
multipliers too. What's that?
let's define those things. Our audience is probably a little confused.
Okay, so in my relationships, they have been mostly been me, one male and two females, or FMF, whereas I'm sort of in the center. In most cases, they were triads where the two women had relationships with each other, and in other times, not necessarily. Um, Mine's probably more common, but there is definitely it's probably a plural minority of the relationships. There's other configurations as well. There's multiple men. There's quads. But also some have branches where I'm seeing someone and then they're seeing two other people and I'm not involved in those two other people as well. So poly is where everybody has acknowledged that they are in a poly relationship. The configuration itself doesn't necessarily matter. Whereas you were just talking about the poly mono, where I may be in a poly relationship with two women, and then this other person I'm in a relationship does not want to be any part of the extended relationship other than just me. I think that's the best way to define that. And I think you've had experiences in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. With the way you're describing it, it's like no part of it. My partners, every mono partnership I've been in, they've wanted to get to know my other partners, and they like going out together and spending, like, my metamors spend time together. My partners talk on the phone, and they go out for metamor dates, and if they had metamors, I would go see them. The only one that dates is the one in Indiana, so I don't get to see Matthew a lot.
I like the word metamor. I love that word.
Yeah, I love that word. And a metamor, by the way, guys, is your partner's partner. It's meta more. So it's your partner's partner, and I encourage a close relationship with your metamor, and that's something we're going to do an entire episode on metamors and your relationship with them. I think it's something that's really important. I don't want to go too deep into it today, just because we have limited time. But why don't we talk about just two poly people negotiating a relationship, and where they see whatever number of people in whatever variation. So what would it be entailed in that kind of negotiation, Tony?
Well, there's two aspects of it. There's the sex end of it, and then there's the relationship end of it. And I think a lot of guys, especially, get overwhelmed with the whole sex end of it, and they forget that it's not sex all day, all the time. Um, although some days it can be, but
We're not having orgies. That's not poly.
no,
That's not what poly's about. But
no.
I
Yeah,
mean, if you're having an orgy, please call me.
yeah, exactly, exactly. There's nothing wrong with having an orgy now and then, but the reality of it is when you're in a relationship, you're probably working 8 hours, you're probably sleeping 8 hours, you're probably doing some cooking, some cleaning, some laundry, and in between all of those things, I like to have sex in between all those things, but sometimes that doesn't happen as much as we'd like to think or believe it. Um, but those are the things you need to talk about when you're having your conversation with your partner. Let's suppose you've gotten past the fact that, yeah, we'd like to fool around with another person. Um, and then you're probably lying in bed, and then you're probably talking about, okay, wouldn't it be kind of cool if like we suppose you have a dog, say, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if someone here could watch the dog while we go out tonight, and then I could go out with that other person the next night and you could watch, and kind of rotate the chores. And that's what happens in all the poly relationships I've ever been with, is you kind of divide the load up, and it actually makes everyday life a little easier. And those are other facets of the relationship that sometimes get overlooked. And of course, then there's the sex end of things. Sometimes your partner may want to explore something. Suppose you're with a female partner, they may be curious of exploring with another female partner. I've encountered many relationships where they've always been curious but never had a safe area where they felt like they were necessarily had to do anything. And even in polys, you're never forced to do anything that you do. It's always, well, at least it should always be consensual from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's really important in negotiation actually take the time to talk about like the genders that you're interested in, because sometimes it can throw people for a loop if you don't have that discussion. I mean, I know that one of my partners that I dated didn't know that I liked women until about like 4 months into the relationship, and I don't know how that got brushed over. Um, and we'd been poly for a while. I'd never seen any women, but I was attracted to this girl, and we were both attracted to her. And he was talking to her at a bar one night, and I was like, she's really cute. And he didn't know that I liked women, and he was like, that's amazing. So you like her too? And I'm like, yeah, I do. So we ended up bringing her home, which was awesome. But this was the first instance, and I mean, it all works out and it's okay, but sometimes it can get really confusing and baffling for somebody when they've been with you for 4 months and don't know that you like the same gender or opposite gender. Sometimes, us women only see women for a while, and then suddenly, and we're dating a woman, and suddenly we want to see a guy and they're confused. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to be upfront about like the genders that you're interested in. And there's other genders than that, which also can throw your partners for a loop as well. And so one of the other things that's really important is negotiating scheduling and how scheduling is going to take place. What's really important is to specify how far in advance you're going to actually schedule these things. So with a few of my partners, it's been, I need to know a week in advance what your schedule is going to look like this week. And that way I can fill in the times that you're not busy or with other partners, and we can negotiate that.
I love Google Calendar, by the way.
Right. And yeah. I'm going to have something so much better than Google Calendar. I'm really looking forward to it because Google Calendar has got to go. But it'll sync up with your Google Calendar, so you'll still be able to sync it. But it's really important to specify how much time your partners want notification about where you're going to be, especially if you're living together. That's a major problem. Don't ever just disappear or assume that if you schedule till like midnight, that it's just okay to just stay. Because you need to be really clear where you're going to be. Otherwise, it's not honest and open communication, and it's no longer ethical non-monogamy. Now you're cheating.
Do you find that you have? Do you find you have better? Do you find you have better communication with ones that you live with versus any relationships you may have had that you didn't live with?
Oh, absolutely. But then again, I'm extremely selective about who I live with. I am very selective. So I tend to live with people that are just good communicators in the first place. It's one of the criterias for me moving in is they have to be a good communicator beforehand. And it's one of my poly criterias, but I don't take it quite as seriously as I probably should. But if in regards to living with somebody, I'm very strict about they have to be a good communicator. They have to be aware of their emotions. Again, you're responsible for your own emotions. I only date people who are emotional libertarians, who believe that they're responsible for their own feelings and nobody else's. You can't make somebody feel a certain way, as we went over in our emotional libertarian episode. But so there's scheduling, and there's how are you going to stay the night? You need to be clear about that. And then those are really, and of course chores, as Tony mentioned, and those are really like the day-to-day life relationship aspects of it. And I'm sure there are other things, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to message us on the Control Alt Love page. And I mean, if there are enough questions, we'll do a whole nother episode about it. But what's important is to move on to negotiating the sexual relationship with your partner in a poly relationship, and then we'll talk briefly about a monopoly situation. So, Tony, what kind of aspects will we be looking at when we're negotiating a poly relationship in regards to sex?
Well, there's the first one. It should actually be something all non-monogamy should be looking at, or even when you're just dating a monogamy, is protection, birth control, also STD control.
Oh God, so true.
It's sometimes overlooked, and it's sometimes you want to talk about those things even long before you're even meeting another person at a party or whatever, so that you have a baseline expectations of what's going on as far as protection. I always keep condoms with me. Not that I anticipate always having sex everywhere I go, although I'd like that. That would be kind of nice. But I always have condoms with me at all times, whether it be in my glove compartment or in an actual case. Don't just keep condoms in your pocket; they get bad. You can get a little metal case, or even if you want to be classy, the old style cigarette cases, and you can keep them in there, the little tin cases.
Men and their little things that they carry around for sex. They have all these little sex.
Women have their purses. So, it's always best to be prepared.
That's true. That's so true.
So that is one thing. Also, sometimes you may want to go and pre-negotiate what kinds of sex acts you may be interested in. For instance, you may have a partner who has an aversion to oral sex, or may feel uncomfortable you doing oral sex with another person. Those types of things.
Or having sex with another person. They may be comfortable with you doing oral, but they're not comfortable with you having sex. And these are all things you shouldn't assume that sex is going to be involved in every poly situation.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes there, another situation is some people like making out with another partner, getting all hot and heavy, and then going back to their other partner for a wild sex romp. I mean, there's many combinations as far as how far you're willing to go with sex, what protection you're using, what kind of sex acts you're going to do, that kind of thing. Again, it's easier before you've gone ahead and met someone, so you have a baseline. Another thing I was thinking about is how do you have these kinds of conversation when you're in a public area? Suppose you're at a party and you meet this really, really cute girl or guy or whatever, and your other partner is right there, or maybe not. How do you communicate to the other partner? And that's sometimes you can get away with verbal, but there's also the non-verbal communication. People just think that communication is verbal. And sometimes it's a look or a nod. There's that famous Star Trek episode where Picard, he looks at Riker, and Riker knows exactly what needs to be done, and he executes the order without Picard even mentioning a word. And what that stems from is when you're with somebody long enough and you've communicated, you've verbally talked a lot, and talking a lot is good idea no matter what kind of relationship, whether it be a mono or poly relationship.
Yeah.
You kind of get a vibe and a feel what the other person's thinking just from looks and glances. no communication's perfect. Yes, there will be slip ups or whatever. But if you're talking long before you're in those situations about every little thing, whether it be relationship, sex, protection, kids, whatever, it will help you later on in this, when you're finally in that situation where you do need to non-verbally communicate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something to be said for coming up with like a signal or a word when you're talking with somebody at a party and you really like them and you just kind of want to have some time to keep talking to them without your partner interrupting. There's definitely like hand signals and things you can kind of come up
Oh
with,
yeah.
or like words
And when you're
to kind of be like, I'd like some time to talk to this cute girl.
do you know sibling languages, like sister languages, when you're growing up with your sister or whatever, and then there's certain words or whatever that you form? Well,
Yeah.
that happens in normal relationships too. It's not just safe words, like, there's the baseline, the green, red, yellow, which I highly recommend everybody have safe words no matter what. Again, talk about those too. But also there's the other words, like you could have a word for a really cute girl, like buccaneer or daylight or something like that, which are actually words that I know couples use when they're trying to signal to their partner that there's somebody there that they would like to have some form of relationship, whether it be sexual or not. Covertly talk about it, and when they're in a crowd and nobody knows what the heck they're talking about. But yeah, so you can actually have verbal communication skills that way. And again, if you're talking long ahead of the time, then it preps you up for later on.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk a little bit briefly about the mono-poly relationship because it's something I'm somewhat of an expert in. So the mono-poly relationship has a little bit of a different dynamic than any of these other relationships, in which the rules for the two people are going to be different. But that's okay because they are the overall encompassing rules for the relationship. So you're still playing by the same rules, but it just happens that the rules for each of you are different, if that makes any sense. So one of the things that you'll have to keep in mind when negotiating a mono-poly situation is to keep in mind what you're both comfortable with. Because in this space, you're going to be comfortable with each other doing different things, especially take into consideration what the monogamous person is comfortable with, especially if they've never been with somebody that is poly. Kind of stepping into those waters can be really uncomfortable. If you're not currently with somebody, it's really helpful to kind of give a little bit of time for you to get to know each other before you start dating other people. I find that when I enter a mono-poly situation, it goes best when we start out without me seeing somebody. That's not, a rule of thumb. It's my preference. And it's just always worked out that way for me. I've never entered into a mono-poly situation after I've had a poly situation going on. So weird oddities of Lauren's life. And, it's important to ask the questions. It's important to let the monogamous person know that they have rights and that they have the ability to make requests. And so, because a lot of monogamous people will be like, okay, they're poly, so like they'll assume that there's these set of circumstances that you're going to just have sex with people and that they just need to put up with that. And that's not how it is. And that's going to be a very volatile relationship if they assume that. So don't let them assume that. Tell them, this is how I like to conduct my relationships. These are the things that I do. This is how I schedule. This is, I won't spend the night unless these circumstances, or I don't spend the night, I will always tell you this far in advance before I spend the night, or these are the types of people I like. These are the kinds of things that would be acceptable for you to call me and end my date for. And that's the other thing. One of the big things across all of these relationships, one of the things that should be really important, because you care and love these people. And like, that's the most important, essential thing. That's the baseline, is that you love these people. So if there's something that comes up, you need to have a clear set of circumstances that is okay for them to call you and tell you to end your date. And I think that that's one of the key parts of negotiation for all relationships, because there's just circumstances that are going to come up. And then,
And I actually want to add something to that,
yeah,
because I think that sometimes that can be sensitive, a sensitive timing may be bad or whatever, but sometimes you need to have that predefined. I think that's a good spot to have a safe word rather than debating it over the phone. Like there may be questions, well, why should I end it right now, or this or whatever. You should have a predefined word or something. It's just like a safe word. Like if you have I'm sure a lot of women, they have a safe word that or text or whatever for to their best friend to help them get them out of a date if something bad should happen. But you should have that when you're dating in a poly. Maybe someone's feeling uncomfortable, whatever. It doesn't necessarily matter at that moment. Basically, you have the word, the signal to get out of there for whatever reason. You'll talk about it later when you guys are together.
that's why I negotiate it beforehand, because if they call me and they say I need you to come home, I know already that we've already negotiated what those circumstances is, and it will be within the parameters, or at least close to the parameters
Right.
of those negotiations. And so I don't have to ask any questions, because I'm aware that they're
Right.
aware of what I
That
want.
that works for people who have good communication, but people who are starting off in poly relationships are still getting the hang of it. And that's where I'm recommending, well, if they can do it like that, great. But I do think that having just a simple word, not even saying can you come home, having just a word, that way it doesn't, human nature maybe, well, why, or that's maybe their natural response. And I think that some people may need that out at first, at least until they've built that level of communication with their partner. And but by
Absolutely.
all means, being at that level of communication is even better. But
Yeah. And we'll talk in further episodes about how to deal with a situation where one of the partners, or even both of the partners, are having a really difficult time with poly. Things aren't going well, and kind of an episode on dealing with the rough patches, because there are always going to be rough patches.
yeah, they're always
And so I wanted to use our last 8 minutes to kind of talk about swingers. And I know that Tony has a little bit of experience in this area, and I would really like to hear. I'm going to quickly go over my experience with swinging and what we did, and then I'll turn it over to Tony for kind of the negotiation aspect of it.
sure.
So I was a swinger for a while, and before I was poly, and we saw this girl together, and she was very lovely, and we loved her very much. So it's kind of, I call it loving swingers, because I don't think there's a word for swingers who actually have feelings for the other people. So I just made it up. But we only saw her together, so it was a swinger relationship. Um, so this we spent a lot of time talking about what was comfortable. He was not to spend time with her without me there. We only spent time with her when we were together, and that meant me too. We couldn't go out on like shopping dates or anything. Eventually that dynamic changed. We changed the rules, but at first that was what we agreed to, and that was my experience with swinging. So Tony, what are the kind of negotiations that you get involved in with a swinger?
Well, there's lots. There's your partner that you're with, and also there's the other party that you're swinging with, or parties. I love it that you were like reading my mind. I exactly was thinking about this. Even though I don't consider myself a swinger. It's definitely a topic we're talking about. There's swinger parties, and then there's people that you may meet that hey, you want to swing with us? We just want to fool around or see where it goes.
And I definitely want to do a whole episode on negotiating with other parties outside the relationship.
Oh, yeah.
We'll do a swinger episode on that. What I really want to focus on right now is like the negotiation you have with the partner that you're swinging with.
Well, well, the person that I'm swinging with, it would be where we're having a conversation, or we're watching a movie where there are people fooling around with other people, or even a porn, and say, hey, would you ever want to do a group setting like this type of thing? Uh, and you just talk about it over, a period of time. Um, and I think that the easiest way to dabble is just go to a swinger party, and it's always great to go with your partner. Well, number one, it's easier to go to a place, and the second is emotionally it's easier too. Um, And you also have to remember that the situations for each individual encounter is going to be different. I personally have found the parties the least desirable. The most enjoyable relationships I've pursued in the swinging community, where I did dabble, was with best friends, where we just swapped partners. But again, you just want to talk ahead of time before you even in that situation. You talk to your partner, say, "Hey, would you be willing to do this?" Um, and then, of course, talking to the other party. That's a whole nother episode altogether.
And one of the other things that you might want to talk with your partner about in a swinging situation is if one of you end up developing feelings for the other person.
Yeah, and that can happen.
That's really important. And the key, and if you have something set up beforehand, and you've at least, even if you don't come up with something, the fact that it's been brought up in conversation before it happens will soften the blow significantly.
Yeah, you can't anticipate when love will hit you. That's definitely for sure. And especially depending on the number of people, whether it's you as a couple swinging with another couple, that's 4 people total, or just you just with one other person, um, the feeling dynamic is going to be different for each situation. So it is definitely something you want to talk about. And there may be hard limits that you may want to set in place, saying, if I start having feelings for this person, then we definitely got to stop, or let's start exploring something else for a while. Bring out the handcuffs for a while or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So,
and that's the other thing is that going to a sudden stop is sometimes difficult. Sometimes it's easier to just redirect your energies towards something else, and it kind of helps you out a little bit.
awesome. So we are just about out of time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning, but we hope you really enjoyed this episode. We hope that you'll send us some questions, ask us. I'll be checking the YouTube video. I'll be checking, the Control Love messages. If ever you have any questions for us at all, please feel free to send them to us. Nothing is as odd as anything we have ever seen. I promise. We have seen it all between the three of us. So, good news. Next episode, we are going to talk about what a swinger is and what it means to be a swinger. So stay tuned for next week when I have Laurel on to talk about what is swinging, Swinging 101, and maybe a little negotiation talk. So stay tuned, and remember, all love is beautiful.